This rise of a regulatory quango state has led to an enormous disaffection with the political process in Britain, an alienation and a sense of alienation by the voters. You probably couldn't have picked up a newspaper that mentioned Britain over the past year or looked at an article on television without being aware of the expenses scandal that has affected Westminster. The expenses scandal has been so toxic in Britain because it has confirmed a suspicion that already existed by the voters, that those in public office weren't properly accountable to them, didn't answer to them, and weren't actually able to effect change. I think it's an exaggeration to say that to some people, politicians in Westminster are seen as parasitical. They exist at public expense, but they don't actually deliver what they say they're going to deliver. In many cases because they no longer can, because they have hived off responsibility to this remote bureaucratic quango state. It's had a profoundly bad impact for those of us who believe in small government and a limited role for the state. As the political process has been taken over by regulatory agencies and quangos, we have seen those who exercise executive power unrestrained. There is no longer anyone effectively reining in those who make regulations, those who make spending decisions. And so we have seen a steady growth of big, intrusive government without a proper system of accountability over those who exercise power. Power has grown more arbitrary, more intrusive into the nooks and crannies of people's lives, their classrooms, their children's classrooms, in their wallets, their bank accounts. We need, I think, a radical shift in power in Britain, from the state to the individual, from London to the town halls, the localities, from officialdom to communities and to people who are actually vulnerable to communities in elections. And David Cameron, in his speech in Milton Keynes following the expense scandal, the question is, how do you do this? It's very easy in opposition to talk the talk of letting go, of devolving power, of decentralizing power, of empowering individuals. How do you actually do it? I want to suggest some ways in which I think new conservatism can achieve this. The first is localism, a radical decentralization of power from officials in London to municipal officials in local and district councils. This means a devolution of control over finance. In Britain at the moment, for every £4 spent by the municipal authority, 3 of those pounds is given to them as a central grant by the authorities in London. You cannot have a proper system of local government, I believe, where people are given a proper small c conservative range of tax and spend options available to them at the ballot box if most of the money that they spend is given to them in grants. In fact, you undermine the very notion of conservatism in municipal authorities if you centralise control over revenue. Because you do what we've had in Britain for the past 20 years, you actually punish small c conservative local authorities who keep taxes low and make sure that they spend money wisely. It's because of this we've actually seen a death of municipal conservatism in British cities and towns over the past 20 years. We need to devolve the power to raise taxes to local authorities. But we also, I think, need to devolve control to local authorities over welfare. And I was talking last night with Rob. There's a pilot project in Israel looking at this. The Americans, so often when it comes to public policy, have led the way. Bill Clinton would claim responsibility for it. The Republicans claim responsibility for it too. Whoever's responsible. In 1996, the Americans devolved control over welfare in America. They allowed different states to do different things. And they allowed those in the localities administering welfare to make subjective judgments between deserving and undeserving cases. We need a similar program of devolving control over welfare in Britain. We also need, I think, to devolve control over public goods. And I'll give you an example of how this can be done. Those who administer policing in Britain at the moment answer upward to officials in Whitehall. They no longer answer downward to people. And one of the reasons why the police in Britain are not as effective at fighting crime as they once were a generation ago is because they've become detached from the communities they're meant to serve. Their priorities are set by officials in government, not by local people. So I think it's time to have directly elected people, individuals, running the police. In the United States, they have the system, and it tends to work rather well. You have different responses to different local circumstances. The elected officials overseeing policing in New York City innovate in a way very different to those overseeing police and criminal justice in Vermont. We similarly need to ensure that people have that direct say over how they're policed. It should no longer be the responsibility of central government to do that. Now, there's an argument against this localism you'll hear in Britain, and there are three cases against it. One is that if you decentralise control, if the state in London says we are no longer going to oversee the provision of these public services, you will get variety. Well, yes, you will get variety, but you will not get a random lottery. Random provision of public services is exactly what you get at the moment. Whether you get a clean hospital or a less clean hospital, whether you get a hospital that it makes you better or worse, whether you have a police force who police this way or that way, these decisions are at the moment entirely random. They are arbitrary. They are in the hands of remote officials. If you allow people a direct say over the local services in their community, you will get variety, but it will be deliberate and designed variety, and you will allow best practice to spread. Some people object to giving local government power over public services because they say, if you do this, just look at the people who run my town hall. I wouldn't trust them to make a cup of tea. How can you seriously be giving these people control over more areas of my life? Well, I would argue that one of the reasons why we no longer trust local government in Britain is because, in many cases, it has been infantilized, it has been micromanaged. If we give local government real power and real responsibility, we will start to see local government attract people capable of making these decisions on behalf of their community. And incidentally, I think we would see higher turnouts. We would see a restoration of civic conservatism in Britain, which once flowered and prospered. People sometimes also say, no, letting go like this, the public would fear it. The public wouldn't tolerate it. The public would somehow be concerned that if it was left to them to make the decisions, they would be... Look, we live in a London and a Britain today, a UK today, where it is possible for me to phone up on a Saturday night and order a pizza to my front door, but never to order a doctor to my front door. In fact, on a Saturday, I can't even get to see a doctor. You know, the public, I think, is open to the idea of personalised, consumerist public service provision in a way that perhaps they never have been, because they're so used to it in so many other aspects of their lives. We have what some people have called a sort of an iPod society, where people are increasingly used to choice and making decisions for themselves. If you can make a choice and a decision over something as trivial as Spotify and what music you listen to, why should you not be able to exercise greater choice over how your area is policed, what sort of planning regulations and what taxes you pay locally? There are some areas of public service provision, though, where I think we need to go further than that, and we need to devolve responsibility not just to the community, but to the individual. And over education in particular, I think we need a system of direct individual control, a new legal right to give individual parents control over their child's share of local authority funding, and giving local people, as individuals, individual powers that they currently don't exercise. At the moment, in Britain, people have a lottery-based system of education, where you live, what catchment area you're in. You know, we have catchment areas for schools, but we don't have them for supermarkets. If we ran our supermarkets the way we ran our schools, there would be waiting lists for fruit and vegetables. There would be catchment areas for breakfast cereals. Why can people not exercise the same individual choices over the far more important thing as to where their children go to school that they currently take for granted over where they shop? Even in the centre-left in Britain now, people like Alan Milburn, a once close advisor of Tony Blair's, Julian Legrand, a great intellectual guru, some would say, within 10 Downing Street over the past 10 years, even they are beginning to discuss and contemplate this. They see which way the wind is blowing. I think it's an agenda that the centre-right should ignore at its peril. It's not inconceivable that if we leave it, the centre-left in Britain will move on to this turf. What about politics? We can localise control over public services, we can get central government out of the way that they run. What about politics? Well, I think we need real direct democracy in Britain. We need to recognise that British politics today, Big Ben, the House of Commons, great heritage, wonderful tradition, it doesn't work the way it should. And it doesn't work the way it should because there is not enough choice and competition in our political system. On the centre-right, we all accept that choice and competition raise standards over economic things. It's time to accept that we need choice and competition to raise the standards in politics. And frankly, the standards have been well below par.